Chapter 2 Fireworm Spring 4978 Date unknown. They spoke to each other as if she wasn't there, as if she couldn't hear each word muttered only a few feet above her head. Maybe we've just been taking too much. Or it could be the collar. It's not like the tattoos. It shouldn't have such an effect on her health. She's healthy, just... She sighed, opening her eyes and letting them adjust to the brightness of the room. She didn't bother to pull at the leather straps holding her to the cold slab of a table. To either side of her, the journeyman mages whispered. Ran was thin, with pale brown hair he kept long and loose to his shoulders. He stood a few inches taller than Brahm, who was built more stocky, with short dark hair, nearly black, but with hints of chocolate in the magical light that filled the room from the hanging orb on the ceiling. "Are you going to take me back to my room now?" she asked quietly, interrupting their discussion. Her voice came out raspy from lack of use, and she sighed again, trying to swallow but not finding enough saliva to wet her throat. "Yeah, Red," Ran said softly, reaching for the straps on her left side. Brahm grunted, going for her right side and fiddling with the lock before he stopped, resting a hand gently on hers for only a moment, then pulling away from the heat of her skin. "Or," he said, glancing back up at his fellow mage, "we could take her to see the others. Kids are supposed to like animals." "She isn't a normal kid, Brahm," Ran argued. Still, he glanced out the door that led to the underground hall that would take her back to her locked and empty room, obviously considering the idea. "Animals?" She croaked the question, and Brahm reached for a glass beside the vials of blood he had drawn from her bound arm. "Yeah, Goldie, we got a new litter of kittens. They have red scales just like yours." He lifted her head just enough to pour some of the lukewarm water into her mouth. She gulped eagerly until he was forced to let her go, rubbing his palm on his robes. Ran hummed again, still unsure. "It can't hurt," Brahm argued as he finished with the buckles on his side. "She hardly spoken for the last month, and the Archmage hasn't let her out since autumn." "It could hurt, though. Those beasts are dangerous," Ran countered. But Brahm scoffed. "It's not like they can burn her, and they'll stay in their cages." Ran hummed, and she waited, unbound but still. "We'll try, but if they snap, she's going back to her room." She rolled to her side, and Ran helped her to sit up, still dizzy from the samples they'd taken. Brahm passed Ran her dress, and they slipped it over her head. She almost made them help her pull her arms through the sleeves, but in a rare wash of curious energy, she did it herself, sliding off the table and waiting for them to open the door. Ran walked ahead of her, Brahm behind. She was never allowed in the hall by herself, and though they didn't take her back to her room, as they usually would, that rule wouldn't change. She stared at her bare feet as she walked, the 3 scaled stripes on her right foot peeking out with each step. Brahm had said the animals had red scales like hers. The ever-present sound of mewling and yipping grew louder as they approached the furthest door in the hall. She turned into the room, only to stop dead in her tracks. The room was huge, almost 30 feet square and lined with caged stalls, each holding a different animal with sparkling scales or vibrantly colored fur. A large jungle cat yowled in greeting, its red scales glistening in the steady magic light. In the cage beside it, a wolf with green fur, the color of cut emeralds, barked and danced on its front paws. Another lazy cat lounged in its stall, stretching and extending golden claws as it yawned, draping a leathery wing over its side like a blanket. "Pretty," she breathed, her eyes wide, their pupils constricted to slits like the large cats in the room. She stepped toward the nearest cage and reached towards the scarlet cat as though in a trance. It tilted its head at her curiously, and she let her fingers slip between the bars. "Watch it, Goldie," Brahm called, grabbing her shoulder to pull her away. The cat hissed, reaching through the bars and pawing not at her, but at Brahm's arm. Brahm jerked away before the cat's crimson claws could dig into its flesh, but the girl just grabbed the cat by the jaw, forcing its eyes to her. "No! Be nice!" She let go and bopped it lightly on the nose. The beast dropped to the floor of its cage, laying its head flat on the ground before rolling over to show her its glittering scaled belly. For the first time in a very, very long time, she giggled, kneeling in front of the cage and scratching the cat on the chin as it purred. Behind her, Brahm laughed nervously and Ran pat him on the back. "Well, she seems happier at least." "And they like her more than us," Brahm added as another cat 3 cages down hissed at him. "It's like they're made of jewels," she said, reaching into the cage with her other hand so she could pet the cat with both. The 3 scaled stripes on her left hand were a near match to the scarlet cat's. "Do you want to help us feed them, Red?" Ran asked. She spun on her knees to tilt her head at him, the cat rolling over enough to do the same. Something in the twin expressions made Ran laugh, and he gestured to the far corner and the crate there. "There's cut steaks in that box. Get 2 for each and you can feed them." She scrambled on her hands and knees before she managed to get to her feet, sprinting to the box and straining to open the heavy lid. Her fingers squelched on cold, bloody meat, and she turned around with 2 fistfuls, then froze. They hadn't followed her. Brom and Ran still stood together by the first cage, talking to each other and not even looking at her. Slowly, she walked to a different cage on the opposite side from the mages. They didn't stop her or call her over. Was this freedom? She could go anywhere in this huge room. Something cold brushed the back of her hand, and she jumped, dropping the stakes. A wolf that seemed to be carved of silver tilted its head at her, ice-blue eyes looking from the stakes to her face before it let a long blue tongue loll from its mouth full of large teeth. She retrieved the dropped meat and stepped closer to the wolf, offering it to him and tilting her head in equal curiosity. Gingerly, it took the slab of steak with its front teeth and pulled it slowly from her slack fingers. "Do you like them, Goldie?" Bron whispered from behind. She jumped again, spinning fast enough that she smacked the poor wolf in the face with her golden hair. She took a moment to look around at all the animals again before she smiled broadly at her 2 caretakers. "They're like living treasures!" "That's the smile I like to see." Ran knelt beside her, reaching out to carefully brush some of her hair back without touching her skin. Just barely brushing the 3 scaled stripes on her right cheek. "How would you like to help us take care of them once in a while, Red?" She was too happy for words and lunged forward, wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight but swift hug. He flinched, but pat her on the back anyway as she pulled away. She'd thought her life wasn't worth living, locked in her room except when escorted to the lab to give samples. But if she could help with these treasures, even just once a week, it would give her a purpose. "I would love to," she answered, not bothering to fight the tears running silently down her cheeks, wetting skin and scales on their way to her chin. "What are you doing? Why is the fire weirman here?" At the sound of the Archmage's deadpan voice, she folded in on herself, rolling her shoulders and staring past Rand's legs as he rushed to stand. Archmage Morndancer stood in the doorway, sternly glaring down his journeyman. Brom stepped between her, Ran, and the Archmage, pulling the man's attention to himself. "We thought she might like to see the other subjects, Archmage." He licked his lips nervously, now that the Archmage was focused only on him. We thought she could help us feed them. Stretch her legs a bit." The Archmage didn't explode. He didn't even yell. "You've already gathered her samples?" he asked. "Yes, Archmage," Bran answered quickly. Archmage Morndancer slowly let his eyes trail past the journeyman to her. She bit her lip, but tried to stand taller. Morndancer merely huffed. "Very well. She is not to be left unattended." "No, Archmage," Ran and Bron confirmed in unison. "Perhaps she is old enough now," the Archmage muttered to himself as he turned to leave.